It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Anti-fracking campaigners are facing increasingly more aggressive police tactics in the UK. The network of police monitors known as Netpol warn of an increase in more robust and aggressive tactics by the police against anti-fracking protesters. This is particularly the case in Lancashire in northwest England at the gas company Quadrilla at their shale gas exploration site near Blackpool. Netpol have posted a short clip that they say is video evidence of a recent assault by Lancashire police officers on a field borough councillor. Let's have a look.
That is our councillor, Roger. Get up, Roger. Are you okay, mate? Do you need an ambulance, Roger?
How dare you! How dare you!
One treble nine.
I'm a councillor. What's he do?
This is my councillor.
Did you push me? Did you push me? Get back.
Excuse me, sir. Do you realise who that...
That was a field borough councillor that was knocked down. Netpol argues that such behavior from police are the inevitable product of the increasing discretionary powers of the police along with their relationship with the fracking companies. Well, let's find out what that is. Joining us today to discuss the aggressive policing towards anti-fracking campaigners is Kevin Blow. Kevin is a coordinator with Netpol and he's an activist in Newham, East London. Thank you so much for joining us, Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me on.
So, Kevin, give us a sense of when you say, or Netpol says, robust and aggressive. We saw a little bit of that in that clip, but I imagine there's a lot more to it than we saw.
Well, I think it's important to start off by saying that what's happening in Lancashire at the moment is not the first time that there's been protests against fracking sites. And it's not the first time that an elected representative has been assaulted. I mean, back in 2013, a member of the British Parliament was arrested, and her son was very aggressively dealt with on a demonstration in southern England. I think the expectation was that over the course of the 2 years that we've been working with the anti-fracking campaigners and putting pressure on the police, they would have learned something, and that doesn't seem to be the case with what's been happening up in Lancashire. So initially, the demonstrations were relatively peaceful. There weren't particularly significant numbers of arrests, and that changed. And it changed because I think the police's attitude towards what they would consider to be a legitimate or lawful protest was standing on the other side of the road from the entrance to the camp, holding a placard and singing songs. The moment that people were prepared, quite without any sense of using any violence, but were prepared to walk slowly in front of lorries, blockade the entrance, then the tactics changed and they became considerably more aggressive. And there was a great deal of the sense that people were far more likely to be arrested.
Right. Kevin, when you say this is a result of the more discretionary powers given to the police, besides the evidence on the picket lines and on the protest lines that you are observing, is there any notice or policy shifts that have taken place in terms of direction to the police?
Well, I mean, the police have always had fairly wide discretionary powers, and what reins them in is a sense of either that it's the public won't accept the level of aggression that may be applied to a particular protest, or simply because the external pressure has built up so much to try and prevent them from doing something. I mean, the laws that are in place that they can use to make arrests and that they can use to restrict the protests have always been there. One of the things that's been really interesting about the police's response to the fracking movement is the fairly creative use of legislation that was never intended to be used for protests. So laws that were intended to prevent secondary picketing by trade unions, for instance, has been used against anti-fracking campaigners. And I mean, our concern is that other potential pieces of legislation that were never intended to be used to prevent somebody from going about exercising their legal right to freedom of assembly are likely to be used against campaigners in this particular instance, because the fracking companies and the fracking industry has significant levels of political support from the government. So powers that are intended, for instance, to deal with antisocial behaviour, often young kids out on the streets, have been used to exclude people from a particular area for up to 48 hours, and that's intended deliberately, we feel, to attempt to paralyse the political opposition that exists to the fracking industry.
Right. And is there a direct relationship between the police and the quadrilla company, or between the police and the extraction companies here?
Well, there has been some evidence. I mean, it's difficult to point to, because obviously so much of this happens without any degree of transparency at all. We certainly come across memoranda of understanding between the police and the companies about the way that they will conduct policing operations, and on the face of it, that kind of document is entirely legitimate, but there has been evidence of collaboration around getting messages out to the media, for instance. And what it's done is it's helped to increase the level of suspicion of the campaigners about what side the police are on, whether they are genuinely neutrals in the middle, or whether they're simply there to act on behalf of the fracking companies.
Right. And on March 27th to April 10th, a group called Reclaim the Power will engage in what they call a fortnight of action against the fracking supply chain. What do they mean by it, and what kind of actions are being planned?
Well, from what I've seen, there's been action against some of the suppliers for the fracking sites. So, for instance, cement companies, but also PR companies that work with the fracking industry, some of the financiers. I mean, supply chain in that sense means targeting the broader support that's available to the fracking industry. Because my understanding from speaking to campaigners is that they say the fracking industry is relatively new and relatively weak in the UK, and financially the companies involved in it are very small, and so what they're doing is they're essentially challenging those companies to deal with a widespread protest all over the country.
Right. And I understand that Netpol itself have launched a campaign to call for the repeal of dispersal powers that the police have under Section 35 of the Anti-Social Behavior Crime and Policing Act of 2014, part of which I think you referred to earlier. Can you explain to us what is the connection that these powers have with the targeting of anti-fracking campaigners?
Okay, I'll try and explain it as simply as I can. So the 2014 legislation was a mishmash of different changes in the law, but one of those was making it more simple for the police to be able to disperse people, to be able to use a power to force people to leave an area for a period of time, and if they return, that they will be arrested. Now, that legislation or similar powers have existed for a number of years. I mean, they've been around for a decade, and they've always been controversial. But in the main, they have been reined in by certain safeguards. So the police were required to talk to the local municipality about how those powers would be used. They were required to issue a notice in advance. And what the 2014 Act did is it removed most of those safeguards. What it said is that if the police want to force you to leave an area, then they can do so just by ringing up and getting the authorization of a senior officer. The period when they can remove people has been extended from 24 to 48 hours, and it's been used by the police in different parts of the country, not only against anti-fracking campaigners, but also against a variety of other different protest movements. And it's something that we've been documenting for the last 2 years, because the power actually came into force in 2015. It was used at an anti-fracking protest in Cheshire, which is also in the northwest of England, but it's been used against housing activists. It's been used against opponents of hunting in the UK. It's been used against opposition to the far right. All of these things are is the use of a power that is not against antisocial behaviour. And social behaviour is something which is significantly different, and we argue that the legitimate right to protest is never antisocial behaviour.
Right. Kevin Blow from the UK, and he's a coordinator for Netpol. I thank you so much for joining us and enlightening us about what's going on the ground, and hope you keep us posted. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.